Good morning or afternoon. So I was doing my morning devotions as usual, and this morning it was put in front of me. A lot of people don't understand what it means to have a childlike faith and why it's so important. So I figured I'd do a video about it and help you guys understand it. Um, so I was reading this morning the Bible, which is what I read during devotion when I do devotions, and I came across 2 Kings, the 5th chapter. And in 2 Kings, the 5th chapter, you'll find that we're talking about Naaman and how Naaman got healed. Naaman was a king. Well, excuse me, he wasn't a king. He was a ruler of the army. And it was the army of the king of Aram. I don't know the pronunciation exactly, but anyway, he was the king's commander for their army. So Naaman had captured a little Israelite girl to be his wife's servant, and Naaman was good at his job. You know, he won several victories for the king and for the nation, and he was good. But he had one problem. He had a disease on his skin. It was plaguing him, and it was taking him to a place where he didn't feel comfortable or confident. And so the Israelite, the little girl, went and told him that she knew of a person who could help him heal or could heal him. And she suggested that Naaman go to this man who could heal him. And the man that she was speaking of was the prophet Elisha. If you want detail on who Elisha is, I can give you detail on that separately. But anyway, Elisha was a prophet. And he had the power to heal. That was one of his gifts. And so the little girl suggested, like I said, that Naaman, go forth and see him. So Naaman went to the king, his king, and said, hey, listen, this guy can heal me. I want to go check it out. So his king sent notification to the king of Israel, which is where Elisha was. And that's how the little girl from Israel knew him. So Naaman's king sent word to the king of Israel. The king of Israel was like, I can't heal nobody. I ain't got God's power like that. So he took off his clothes. He tore his clothes. And word of this process got back to Elisha. And Elisha was like, what? The king tore his clothes for what? So he found out. And then Elisha told the king, hey, listen, send this dude, Naaman, to me. And I'll show him that there is a prophet in the land. So Naaman goes forth to Elisha's home. And when he gets there, Elisha sends a servant to tell Naaman to go to the Jordan River and wash himself 7 times, and then he'll be healed. Naaman was like, what? So, yeah, no, I'm not doing that. And here's an important lesson. Number 1, first of all, Naaman went in faith, stood in faith, but then when his healing came through way of a messenger, because it wasn't the way that he wanted it to be sent to him, and because he couldn't see Naaman couldn't see Elisha's face for what it really was. He didn't see Elisha come before him. He expected Elisha to come before him and literally heal him. He expected it to happen that way, and it didn't. And a lot of times God doesn't work that way. So the lesson here is Naaman lacked faith in what Elisha was doing. A lot of times the prophet that is sent to you may have to send you messages to help you in your deliverance, and may not necessarily be able to come to you directly, because a lot of times a prophet, speaking from experience, a lot of times a prophet is protected in a way that they have to stay away from certain things, or they have to stay, protected. And in order to have protection, they have people around them who, send forth messages and, go on their behalf and speak on their behalf. And then in that process, you have your healing if you receive it. But anyway, back to the story. Naaman didn't receive it. So Naaman was like, no, I'm not. This man ain't nobody's healer. I'm good. Goes home. Gets home. Mad. Just upset because he expected to be healed and it didn't happen. So he's talking to one of his servants, and his servant is like, yo, why can't you just go to the water and, wash 7 times? I mean, after all, a prophet did give you the message, right? So Naaman thought about it. Then Naaman went to the Jordan River and he washed 7 times. And guess what? He was healed. Again, back to point number 1. Lacking faith blocks a blessing. Sometimes you have to do that extra step for yourself to meet God, for God to meet you. And he's waiting for you to do that. And you choosing not to is only blocking your own blessing. Moving forward in the story. Well, that's the end of the story. That's the biblical part of it. But there's a bigger message here. Initially, I had said about having a childlike faith. You see how a little Israelite girl told him to go do that? Because she believed that Elijah had the power to heal. She believed enough to go tell her master, a grown man, sir, go see this guy. He got you. He missed his healing because of what he chose to do. Not because God wasn't showing up. So a lot of times we have to, again, take that initiative to meet God, and God will meet us. But if we're not willing to take that step, it's only our fault. But to this childlike faith, because this little girl had a magnificent faith in this man. So, and ultimately it showed her faith in God. To you, I say the same thing. Sometimes you need a childlike faith. Now, people say it all the time. People preach about it in church, having a childlike faith. But here's the thing. That takes work, because as adults, a lot of times things have gotten in our way. We've been through circumstances, we've been through processes, we've been through experiences, and those experiences have left us blocked to who God really is. Because in a child's eyes, anything's possible. A lot of people say they say that kids are like sponges. They are. And they are in faith the same way. That's why their imaginations can say things and just, they don't understand a lot of times what adults go through because they don't see that. All they see is the goodness that can come out of a situation. So to you, back to this childlike faith. In order to have a childlike faith, you have to humble yourself before God. Think about it like this. When a child is born, they go through a process. Infancy, toddler, adolescent, teenager, young adult. That's the cycle of life from a humanistic perspective. Now, spiritually, it's kind of the same thing. When a child is born, the first thing that everybody hopes to hear is that cry. That initial cry to make sure that the child is alive. You got to do that crying. In the spiritual world, for you to have a childlike faith, the first thing you got to do is humble yourself, like I said. And sometimes that takes some crying. And I'm talking about tears, like hard tears. Like you depend on nobody else but God. You separate yourself from everybody else, and the only thing you have to rely on is God. And in those moments, you will cry. If you get yourself to that place, you will cry. There's no way around it. I've done it. That I'm speaking from experience. And in your crying, God will hear you. And when you hear a baby cry, what do? Oh, I want to hold you. God does the same thing to us. He's our Father. He sees us crying and he comforts us. So once you have that comfort, and once an infant has that comfort, they start to get hungry. They want a little bit more, but they want it from the same source that gave them that initial comfort when they cried. So as a child, you start to drink milk, or as an infant, you start to drink milk. The milk's good, but you're growing. So you're going to start eating table food. In the body of Christ, it's the same thing. You'll start by eating or drinking your milk, which is maybe you going to church, or maybe you having your moments of worship or your morning devotions. But then Something happens where you're not full anymore. And sometimes you go to church and you're spiritually unfulfilled and you leave in a spiritually hungry place. So throughout the week, you begin to look for ways to get that nourishment. So you start to read the word. That's the meat of who God is. Studying the word and putting yourself in a place where you can hear what God is telling you through the word is feeding your soul. So, and feeding yourself spiritually. So we have milk, meat. You're growing. Spiritually, you're growing. Once you've gotten to a place where you started to eat the meat, you start to grow. And in humanistic perspective, as a child begins to grow, their legs get longer, their arms get longer, their vision goes further. So for us in the body of Christ, we start by knowing who God is. Then we start to seek out those around us who are God-like. They know that experience. They know who God is. They know what God has for them. They know what God can do. They know what God can be, and they know how God functions. So to us who are hungry and are growing and have grown spiritual eyes and spiritual ears that thirst after something greater than what we have, the things that we used to do are no longer desirable, and sometimes we want to step away from those things. And that's okay, because that's a sign of growth. And you no longer desire to be in the same environment that you used to be in. You no longer desire to be in the presence of the same people anymore, because it's almost like that's not you anymore. And you wake up day after day saying, I don't know who this person is, but I don't want to be who I used to be. I want to be something different. And that something different feels like it's where I'm supposed to be. So you're still growing. And as you're growing, you'll start to look for those things in your environment. You'll start to seek out people who have that same like-minded desire, have that same spirit in them, have that same indwelling of light within them. And that's okay. You have to be comfortable with that, though. But you cannot, let me repeat this, you cannot continue to do the things that you used to do when you're trying to become something greater, because it'll compromise anything that you've tried to do thus far. And then you may very well have to go all the way back to infancy and start with the milk again, because obviously you missed something along the way. But anyway, as you're growing, you'll start to want to be around different people. And then once you get around these people, once you get into a space where these people make you feel good and you feel good about yourself, and you wake up every day like, yeah, I can't wait to see them. I can't wait to be in their presence, because I get excited when I'm around them. I like what they give me. I like the energy that they have. And then you seek that all the time. That becomes you. You're becoming someone new. You're growing. And the same thing goes for a kid. When they learn something new at school, they're like, I want to go back to school tomorrow. Yo, I liked what I did yesterday. Come home excited, telling you about it, sharing and that's joy to you as a person. And that's joy to our Father when we get to that place where we're excited about him. That's joy to him, that brings him joy. So we continue to seek these things out and seek these experiences out. And then we get to a place where we finally say, okay, I like this here. I want to stay here. And you make choices to stay in that presence. You make choices in your life to put down other things and say no, and say, I can't do this anymore, and say, I don't want to be a part of that anymore. And I just want to be in the presence of God. And then you seek rest in that presence, because in your rest, you're still growing. A lot of times there's a season of rest in life. And the Bible tells us in Hebrews 4 that there should be a period of rest regularly. And if you are not resting, then it's disobedience. So the Bible speaks to having this period of rest. But in this period of rest, God is pouring into you. God is growing you into who he needs you to be. And as you grow, and by the time you wake up from these naps, you'll be able to be who God has perfected you to be. But he can only perfect you when you get to a place of rest. But you have to start on the process of infancy first. Infancy, then you're a toddler, then you're young adult. And a lot of us never really evolve completely to being